Good afternoon, and welcome to the beginning of this year's budget hearings process. We begin with the 2022 budget proposal overview and policy discussion. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to our budget director, Bill Urbanek, as well as Michael Sterling.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. I'm Bill Urbanek. I'm City Council's budget director, and I have a presentation here for our 2022 budget proposal from Mayor Peduto. And I will share my screen here. Keep that moving. There we go. Okay, I'm joined today. I'm joining virtually, obviously, and well, with budget manager Mike Strelick from the council budget office, who's in chambers due to circumstances beyond my control. I need to do this remotely from home today. And we'll start off with that 2022 proposal. It's $650 million in revenue and $613 million in expenditures. Expenditures have increased by $25 million over 2021. Budgetarily, there's room for 900 police officers, and $500,000 is dedicated for recruits this year. We'll talk about the pension. The Peduto administration has stuck with the ordinance, and we've $53 million MMO, $26.7 million in parking, and an additional $19.8 million in the MMO plus. That actually equals the ARC plus a little more, which gives us cash flow in the pension, allowing the investment and principal to stay harmless, which, as long as we have a positive market, will continue to make gains in the pension, which is important for us with our funding levels. There's also a $9 million transfer from the fund balance to PayGo Capital. It allows us a little more flexibility in dealing with some of our capital issues that may not be bond eligible. There's also room for a $60 million bond issue for the capital budget to be funded this year. There's also the total capital budget, which Mike will talk about in a little bit, is $158.6 million. And I'm going to try to keep this quick and show you where I'm going with presentation this year. It's a recurring theme year after year, but I'm going to focus a little more on this. $657 million revenue budget, of which approximately $48 million are American Rescue Plan Act funds. That makes up 7% of our budget. That's the budget shortfall that we have for this year. And if you look at it in this manner, you're talking about potential structural deficit if we didn't have that additional funds coming in from the federal government. If you take a look at our revenues as they're coming in, I've compared them to the 2020 plan, the pre-pandemic plan, 5-year plan we had, and our projections for 2022 in that year. Real estate taxes are approximately $4 million less than what we had anticipated in that 5-year plan. Bright spot is the earned income tax, which is actually about $2 million more. So people that live in the city that pay taxes, their earned income tax, regardless of whether they're working from home, as long as they're working for a company anywhere here in the region, they will pay that tax to us. And that is performing well. Unfortunately, a lot of people are working from home for some of the larger businesses. And as a result, the payroll preparation tax is much lower than it normally would be. A lot of the larger companies have folks working from home. a lot of folks hadn't and haven't yet returned to the office. But hopefully that changes. The other area where we're severely underfunded is parking tax. Of course, when you have people coming to the office day to day, you have fewer parking receipts, as well as with a lot of our amusement tax things. As you see, the amusement tax a little further down, $2.5 million deficit over that 2022 plan or 2020 plan. That'll continue, hopefully, as we have events, as the pandemic eases, as COVID begins to fade. We'll see increases there. Along with that is the facility usage fee. Licenses and permits, I kind of was hoping would be a little bit better because there had been a lot of work done, but apparently not larger scale projects anticipated for this next year. And then you see the other ones, charges and services, forfeits and fines and forfeitures. Of course, you're not writing as many tickets and such. Intergovernmental revenue as well is down $1.2 million. The other bright spot projected for 2022 is the D transfer tax, which has been overperforming, which is nice. But we can't depend on that to last forever. That one particular one is something that will go with the real estate trends. So we're hot market right now in Pittsburgh. Things are selling. We even have some transfers of larger properties, larger commercial buildings. That's helping us. There's some of that anticipated in this next year. So that's looking good right now. So if you look at the very bottom, the total loss revenue here, though, is $30.8 million. And now if I can go to my next slide. Next slide's expenditures. As you can see, this is the divide out of expenditures. Public safety, 35%. That's grown. It was last year, that was 31%. General government's at 12%. DPW pensions is at 17%. And if you notice the, excuse me here, I gotta go to the previous one. The debt service is at 10%, which is good. That keeps us there, but that's going to grow in the out years as we continue to write debt out. Benefit stays at approximately 15%. So some of the things we're doing good at on the expenditure end, but some of the things we will continue to see costs rise, and that's where some of those concerns go. The operating departments, if you look and compare that same comparison, so we have some apples to apples, because last year was sort of a well, the last 2 years of the pandemic budget has been an anomaly. The operating departments were up $510,000. Pension and OPEB is up 2.7. Health benefits, $11 million. Comp, $359,000. And debt service up $3.5 million. And you see that in that plan that we have now, but you also see this here, and that is $18.6 million that were transfers to departments that had previously been in departments. So if you look at this realistically, this year's 2022 budget, and you add the $18 million reduction here, that's now transfers, and you add the $30 million loss of revenue, you come up with the $48 million we're being subsidized this year from the ARPA funds in the operating budget. So here's that outlook, again, broken down. And you see we're projecting a $44 million operating result to begin to bring the fund balance up to where it needs to be. We should and try to be around 15%. We never want to go lower than 10%. So we're right on target with this particular budget. And if you look at the bottom there, you can see the reductions here, the transfers that I had spoken about before. Now I'll go on to the 5-year plan here, because here's where the concern begins to happen. And it happens with on the revenue side. And if you, I'll just point that out real quick. The rest of it, you guys know the story on the 5-year plan. But if you begin to look at the revenues out here, you see this where we're subsidized by the ARP funds in 2021, we were 2022, we are again 2023, 2024. And then you see in 2025, when the ARP funds go away, the revenue drops significantly. And not so with the expenditures. The expenditures keep moving forward here. And that's where we start to get into trouble. So what my concern is, and talk about it again later, is the revenue and expenditures being able to meet, as well as the accuracy of some of the revenue numbers that we have. Because of the pandemic and because of some of the economic changes that we've seen and habits and patterns and such, just like with the real estate people working from home, will these numbers come back? Will the numbers come back for amusement tax? Will the numbers come back for real estate? And will the numbers come back particularly with payroll preparation tax, which is some things we may have to close the gap on later on. So we'll come back to this in a bit. Next, I'd like to hand that over to Mike, who's in chambers.
There it is. Thanks, Bill. So on this slide, it's the total 2022 capital budget and the 6-year capital improvement plan. See, it's $158 million next year. If you can go to the next slide, you can see what that looks like compared to prior years. So Bill was here in 03 and 04 when we didn't have a capital budget. I came on in 08 when the entire capital budget is about the same as what we're going to spend this year in street resurfacing. Some of you were here in 2011 when we, again, had no capital budget. So this year, 2021, 2022, probably 2023, when the infrastructure bill trickles down to local level, it's the highest in total dollar amount that this city's ever seen. But I would caution not to get used to it. The days of $16 million street paving budgets and $10 million to the URA is not sustainable. So it's great news now, but in a couple of years, that money, just like the operating budget, when the federal dollars drop off, we're going to see a reduction in what we can see in the capital budget. Including, if you go to the next slide, the CDBG dollars. It's my favorite chart because it shows a drop since it came in. We have gotten a slight increase. It was down to about $13 million. We're anticipating 14 this year, 14.2 last year. But that money, if it stays at 14 million as projected, with inflation, it continues to drop because that money's less valuable and can do less work out in the community. If you go to the next slide, remind council that there's voting on the operating budget and the capital budget. There's a number of dollars that live not necessarily off book because they're included in our financial system and reported, but you're not voting on these dollars today with you're voting on the Stop the Violence Trust Fund. So one of these 70 trust funds you'll be approving in the coming weeks. That's the capital and the trust funds. But if you can go to the next slide, I'm guilty of looking at things in a silo, the operating budget, the capital budget, the trust funds, but there's programs that of course go across all budgets, like affordable housing, a topic of conversation the last few years. There's money in the operating, there's money in capital budget, there's money, the federal ARP dollars that council approved this year for the 2022 years. And that's just the city money we see. If you zoom out further, there's almost 200 million at the Housing Authority, tens of millions at the URA, county's doing work, private sector is doing some work. And if I could turn it back to Bill for the rest of the operating budget.
I promised you the red and blue lines, red being the expenditures and blue being the revenues. Here's the 5-year outlook, and I did these two slides, one with the ARPA money and one without. And if you see what I talked about before, 2025, we go flat. And this is depending on the success of many of those revenues that we've lost during the pandemic. And you'll see that slide again. One of the things I said before was that we're actually, if we didn't have the ARPA money, we'd be running a structural deficit and be taking money out of the fund balance just to be able to keep ourselves above water. Of course, we all know that. As we voted, as you guys voted last year on defunding the city, if as an emergency contingency plan, thank God we got revenue to make that go away. But as we move into the future, we need to look at different alternatives. Now, this is just an old slide from several years ago when we had some problems, but all these things are still and still should be considered on the table. You have a little bit of time to be able to implement these things. Most of them have to go on the state end, and they all need to be looked at. But at some point in time, if those revenues do not succeed in producing the amount of money to be able to stay up with our expenditures, these things may be necessary to consider. But I would say the bigger issues, and one of the things that everybody always says, oh, we've got to do that at the state. Well, there's an opportunity as we go into the next few years with the new mayor and with the council to talk to the state, to look at some of these different issues and revenue sources and see what would be palatable, both for changing on the state as well palatable to the residents locally here. And finish up. We have a big thank you that we have to give to Congress and the Biden administration for passing the legislation for the ARPA and getting the much needed revenue that we lost during the pandemic. We still have that uncertain future of revenue sources returning and sustaining the amounts needed to catch up to the inevitable increase in expenditures. Just like every business, the city needs to continue to seek out new sources of revenue, enhance collection methods, and of course, reduce expenditures through efficiencies where possible. I want to take the opportunity to thank the Peduto administration, especially their budget team, for their work over the past 8 years. That's from Scott Kunka to Sam Ashbaugh, Jen Prosciutti, and now, of course, Kevin Paulus, all of which were dedicated to the city, all which were very professional, and as well as the folks that they have backing them up as well too. And there's a lot of good people in the background. I hope that as many of these folks are able to stay and keep our city fiscally secure as they have in the past, along with our council, who has also been extremely fiscally responsible. So with that, allow for discussion.
Thank you, Director. Before discussion, I just want to remind all members that the actual hearings themselves will begin tomorrow, starting at 1:30 with the Office of Management and Budget, and then again on Thursday at 10 a.m. with the Department of Public Safety. Is there any comments from members? Council President?
I just want to thank you for chairing the Finance and Law Committee and for the work that you do. You're doing an amazing job. But I also want to thank everyone, all the council members, the budget office, the camera. I don't think the public realizes everything that goes into this, these meetings. We have the IMP department working late and doing all the things that they do. We have our Sergeant at Arms, our clerk's office, and obviously our own budget office doing a lot of work. But it's a good collaboration between us and the administration. So I want to thank them for the partnerships over the years. But I really want to acknowledge that you have been an amazing finance chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from members? If not, entertain a motion to recess.
Second.
We are in recess.
Thank you.